Okay, so tonight we're going to do part two. I've divided this up somewhat arbitrarily into three equal sections. Last week we did from Amicalola Falls up to the start of the AT on Springer Mountain, and we went all the way to Unicoi Gap. That's about 30 miles, and this is another 30-mile section. But these sections would be, lend themselves to a 3 or 4 day hike for most of us, average miles, 7, 8 miles a day, because they also correspond to some really good trailheads with good parking. So you'll see at Unicoi Gap and at Unicoi, there's a lot of parking, and we'll be going through another gap called Neal's Gap. There's a lot of parking there as well. So they're good sections to do. They're practical divisions as well as kind of arbitrary for the purpose of this presentation. I originally did this as one big presentation, but it would have taken too long. I could never have finished it in 40 minutes. Okay, so we're going to do Unicoi Gap to Unicoi Gap. First, I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of the Appalachian Trail. We covered this last week. So for those of you who were here last week, I'll just try and cover this pretty quickly. And then we'll just go through what the trail looks like in Georgia, look at some maps, and talk about our particular section tonight. And I'll talk about these three sections a little bit. And then we'll just get into the hike. I think I'm going to mute you all. Forgot to do that. Okay, now you're all muted. At any time, if you want to get back on, you can just unmute yourself. And again, I encourage Bill and the other one to make some comments. Okay. So just quickly on the history of the trail, it's pretty interesting because the Appalachian Trail is kind of the granddaddy of all long distance hiking trails. And it had a very interesting origin. It was somebody's idea, someone's kind of vision of creating kind of a refuge for urban dwellers in the early 20th century. This gentleman, Benton Mackay, who was kind of a idealistic regional planner up in New England. And he looked around and saw the world getting more mechanized, more urbanized. The rise of the automobile was happening. And he felt that we were losing our contact with our natural environment. And he envisioned this regional plan of a wilderness retreat covering the entire eastern seaboard, where urban dwellers could go to get back in touch with nature, and also that the wilderness and these natural resources could be preserved. So he had this idea in the 20s, 1921, he had this idea, published this paper, but he was, again, this kind of visionary guy. He wasn't so much the doer, but he inspired some other people, and they started talking about it. And these two gentlemen, Arthur Perkins and Myron Avery, they were kind of the doers, and they got things going. They had a lot of contacts in Washington, so they had some help from the government. They were good at organizing, so they had this idea that it should be done with volunteer labor and that it should be decentralized. So they formed local clubs in each of the states that the trail should pass through. And those clubs developed a roster of volunteers who built this trail and maintain this trail to this day. And they also had the idea of building shelters, which we'll talk about a little bit, because that's another nice feature of the trail, is that there are shelters all along. And so they were the ones that got this together, lobbied, got some funding, got Washington involved and other entities involved to help them institutionally. And they got this trail built. And so it was completed from Georgia to Maine in 1937. And as they completed the trail, they realized that their objective was great and they achieved that, but that the trail itself could not exist in isolation, as it were, because the trail only had a true purpose in that it really was a way to gain appreciation of a natural environment. And what they found was there were highways starting to be built back into what were the mountains and the kind of the back country of Virginia and North Carolina and Georgia and Maryland and New York State. And all of a sudden, the cities were growing out towards the country, and there were highways being built through this area where they'd had a wilderness trail. So they realized they had to expand their concept from a trail to a trailway, meaning that there was some kind of boundary around the trail that would preserve the unique natural environment. And then what they did is eventually lobbied and got Congress involved. And then Congress came up with the National Scenic Trails Act in 1968. And that kind of institutionalized these national trails with protection from the federal government. And at that point, the concept expanded to the idea of a greenway, which means that not only do we protect a mile on either side of the trail, but we try to look at it as a natural environment that's a larger regional preservation that needs to take place in coordination with and in harmony with, hopefully, the surrounding human habitation. So the idea of the trail really started as that vision. And as the trail was built and it was made a reality, then we returned to that vision, which was really a place for people who are caught up in this urban environment to get away and see something a little different and get back in touch with the natural state. So the Appalachian Trail itself is currently 2,193 miles long. It goes through 14 different states, as you can see on this map here. On this map, it's interesting, they are giving you the average days it takes for hikers to cover each of these sections. This is the longest hiking only footpath in the world. So there's no other traffic allowed, no bikes, no ATVs, no nothing, no horses. This is just a footpath. There's 464,500 feet of elevation change. So that means that all the ups versus added to all the downs, meaning all the changes add up to that many feet. I don't know who figured that out. I wasn't about to do it for just Georgia. I couldn't find the total elevation change for Georgia, but it's substantial too. There's over 3 million visitors a year to the trail. It's still maintained entirely by volunteers. And there's an umbrella organization called the Appalachian Trail Conservancy. And then these local state affiliated AT groups or clubs. So just a little bit about the trail in Georgia. Those of us living in North Florida probably know Georgia from St. Mary's or Baldwin or Savannah, but or even Atlanta. But this part of Georgia is nothing like the rest of Georgia. It's very rugged, mountainous terrain. There's no peach trees, cotton fields, or peanut farms, and it has some of the highest elevations on the entire Appalachian Trail. So people talk about the White Mountains in Maine. They're definitely high elevation, and they're definitely rugged, and probably the toughest sections of the AT. But Georgia's no slouch either. The lowest trail elevation in Georgia is over 2,500 feet. And once you go past Georgia, you don't get to a higher elevation until you get up north past Massachusetts. One element, one feature of this trail, particularly in Georgia, as someone just mentioned, was these continuous ups and downs, really tough on your legs until you get used to it. We call them PUDs, pointless ups and downs. So you really get to the top of a mountain and you think you've accomplished something, and then you just realize, oh, I just got to go back down again. There's not a lot of ridge lines. There's some, but mainly you're just up, and then you got to go down again. Then you're in a little gap, and then you're going back up to the other, to another mountain. So it's a good workout, and it's a lot of fun. There's a lot of nice views from up there, and it's kind of interesting down in the gaps. A lot of activity down there too. Anyway, it's just a very tall and rugged trail. It's maintained by the local club, which is the Georgia Appalachian Trail Club. And you can go to their website, which is georgia-atclub.org, and get some guidance as to how to best hike the trail, where to get accommodations and supplies. There are shuttling companies up there that can help you get from one end of the trail to the other, or from any destination, getting to the trail, getting back off the trail, and then giving you information about water sources and current availability, trail conditions. So it's a good reference for you. And there's also trail guides. Someone asked last time about, which book I use to plan these trips. So I guess when we get back on video, I'll show you those books that I used, but there's several of them, but the Appalachian Trail Conservancy puts them out. And then this website for the Georgia Appalachian Trail Club has some interactive maps on the website. The other idea of the Appalachian Trail that was from the beginning was to do partnerships with local communities that would support hikers along the way. And so there's some communities that have been recognized by the Appalachian Trail Conservancy as trail communities. And in Georgia, those are Blairsville, Dahlonega, Helen, and Hiawassee. And so they're towns you'll become familiar with if you hike this trail. This is sometimes good to get off and get some supplies or get some shelter. I've had to sometimes hightail it off the trail because of weather. Spend the night in Hiawassee once. So they're very welcoming and they understand hikers and very supportive. So these are our sections that I divided it into. I mentioned Springer to Woody Gap. That's the one we did last time. And that's about 29.3 miles if you include the approach trail, which is from the Amicalola State Park up to Springer Mountain, which is the official start of the Appalachian Trail. What we're going to look at tonight is Woody Gap to Unicoi Gap. That's about 32 miles. And then at our next presentation, we'll cover the rest of the Georgia and a little bit into North Carolina at the next main trailhead in North Carolina, which is Unicoi to Deep Gap. So that meeting will be not next Thursday, but the following Thursday, which is December 3rd. We'll do part 3. Next weekend, next Thursday rather, I think most of us are going to be busy with other things. So the total mileage in Georgia from the southern terminus, which is at Springer, to the North Carolina border is 78.1 miles. The mileage we're covering in this presentation is 93 miles because I'm taking you from Amicalola State Park before you get to the southern terminus, and I'm taking you all the way up past the Georgia border to the next trailhead in Deep Gap. So along the way, there are many shelters. The shelters have privies, which is another word for bathroom or outhouse type bathroom. They supply bare cables and boxes, which help you preserve your food from getting stolen by wild animals. The cables are just where you elevate a bag of food so that it's out of reach of those animals. You can do that yourself with your own equipment, but it's nice to have it provided there so you don't have to rig that thing up to hang your food every night. And they also, in some of these shelters, have boxes that are bear-proof. So this is a map of what those sections look like. Atlanta's kind of somewhere down here to the southwest of the starting point here at Amicalola Falls. And Woody Gap starts over here by Suchess, Georgia. So this green section here is what we're going to talk about tonight. And then next time, the blue section going up above the border there. And here's another viewpoint. 0 to 1 is what we talked about last week. We're doing 1 to 2. I got to show you a close-up of that, which will be a little easier to read in just a minute. And then next time we do 2 to 3. This bottom section here gives you an idea of the topography. So between these two red lines is where we're going to be hiking tonight. And then I've kind of highlighted some of the high points here, literally. So as you can see, there's, the first section we went through, Springer's a nice tall mountain, and there's a couple of big climbs here. but it's starting to get more serious in part 2 and part 3. You've got this this mountain right outside of Woody Gap, which is Cedar Rock. And then you've got Blood Mountain, which is the highest mountain on the trail in Georgia. And that's a good one. And then you've got some of these other ones here, going up to Cow Rock, which we'll see as we go through the presentation. And then you've got a nice sort of gradual, sort of flatter spot here with a little gap in between along a ridge line. And then you've got Blue Mountain just before you get into Unicoi. And Blue Mountain is really steep going down if you're going northbound. If you're going southbound, that's a tall hike out. Just like we'll see next week when you start to go out of Unicoi, you're doing the same thing, but on the other side, going up Rocky Mountain. So you got some good climbs in here, and yeah, you got a workout ahead of you. All right, so here's a close-up with that map that you saw before, just of the section we're going to do. So we're starting here at Woody Gap. It's about 20 mile marker on the trail, from 20 miles from Springer. And we're going to go up through Girard Gap, going to go up Blood Mountain to top of Blood Mountain. And we're going to go into Neal's Gap and see a very famous building and institution there. And then continue up through some of the high mountains here, getting up to Unicoi. And as you can see, there's these little symbols here for shelters. So I'm going to show you a couple shelters. I didn't show you much with shelters last time, but shelters are a pretty important feature of the trail. I don't often stay in shelters. I hardly ever stay inside a shelter. Many times I'm staying at a tenting area around the shelter. And there's amenities at the shelter that I mentioned that are helpful, but not particularly necessary to my way of thinking. But it's definitely convenient, particularly during inclement weather, and if you need a quick shelter. So, but they're nice. A lot of people really like staying in them, and you find them about every 7 miles or so, 7 to 10 miles, I would say, throughout the Appalachian Trail. So you can see here, there's some of them kind of random. These are really close together, Woods Hole and Blood Mountain. But you'll see Blood Mountain's kind of a unique shelter. We'll see a picture of that soon. And then you got the Whitley Gap up here. That's about 10 miles. And then this is about 7 miles to Low Gap. I've stayed around there. And then you have the Blue Mountain shelter. So as you can see, we got 1, 2, 3, 4. We got 5 shelters just in this 30-mile range. So that's pretty good. There's other areas along the way in most of the trail where you can just find a nice place and camp anywhere. Okay, so let's start our hike. We're starting at Woody Gap. Again, I've done these sections in a very haphazard fashion, so you're going to see pictures that are from different hikes that I've taken at different times of year, different seasons, different weather conditions, different groups of people I'm hiking with. So, it's not very consistent, but I've picked out representative photos from all those hikes to show you the features along the way on these different routes. So this is Woody Gap. It's very, very pretty. Right across the street here, you got a very pretty overview of the valley down below. This is Highway 60 in Georgia. A lot of parking here. Really great place to leave a car for a few days. No one's going to bother you, and take a few day hike. As you're hiking northbound from Woody Gap, the first thing you'd have to do is climb this big Cedar Mountain. So that's a pretty tough climb coming right out of Woody Gap, but you're rewarded at the top with this beautiful view and this big bald rock that's called Preacher's Rock. There actually used to be a preacher that went up there and would preach off the rock, and at least that's what the myth says. And so it became known as Preacher's Rock. So this is a pretty steep cliff on the other side of it. So yeah, it's got to be careful, don't get too crazy up there, and keep your kids under control. There are kids who have fallen off and died off of this rock. So, but it's a beautiful view, and it's a nice place to take a little break at the top of that climb. And then let's look at where we're going elevation wise. So we're already at 3,582 feet in elevation. And we're at mile 21. We started at mile 20. So the next spot I wanted to show you was Lance Creek, which is really the first campground along the way, a decent distance from Woody Gap. And so I've stayed here. It's at mile 23.9. So it's about 4 miles, 5 miles past. And so now you can see the elevation's lower. So it's down in a gap. There's a creek running through it, very accessible water. So it's a nice place to camp. The only thing is I can't quite understand the idea behind these designs of these platforms they have for the tent, because it's at the bottom of a hill. So luckily I've never stayed here during a rainstorm, but I kind of wonder if you might find yourself in a swimming pool the night after a rain, the day after a rainy night. So, but we had a nice time, and there's spare cables up at the top here, and then there's more trail. There are more campsites on the other side of this little hill, and then you go down this hill, and there's a beautiful, nice, clear stream with good water. Then you come down, come back up after that, and then you come into a gap called Girard Gap. That's at mile 26.2, elevation 3284. And from Girard, you begin a very slow climb about through 2 or 3 miles up the tallest mountain on the trail in Georgia, which is Blood Mountain. And as you can see, we're getting quite steep here. They put stairs in and some switchbacks to help you. But it's not too bad of a climb going northbound. Coming southbound, the opposite direction, coming up the other side is much steeper and tougher, but a lot of people do it as day hikes. So it's not inaccessible at all. But you'll see when I'm showing you the pictures coming down, there's a lot to it. So anyway, so we go up to the top of Blood Mountain. You can see how that climb looks. It gets more and more rocky. We start to see some of the bedrock of these mountains. And this is a billion-year-old rock called gneiss. It was formed many years ago, and then this mountain was uplifted, and over time just became worn down with glaciation, what have you. So it's a very, very old mountain range. So here's the top of Blood Mountain. Here's the shelter on top of Blood Mountain. This is an unusual shelter. They're not all like this. They're mostly built out of wood. This is a totally stone structure. Very interesting. Here you got your beautiful views on the top of Blood Mountain. This is what makes the climb worth it. And here's, I mentioned, coming down, there's got a lot of sheer rock to be careful of as you're trying to make sort of a scramble coming up and down in a lot of these stone steps. So it's a little tougher coming southbound up Blood Mountain, but going down, it's steep, then you got to watch your footing coming down. So here we're getting down towards Neal's Gap. So this is coming down Blood Mountain. You have these interesting rock formations. It's called Flat Rock Gap. And then finally you get down into Neal Gap. And Neal Gap is kind of a famous place for hikers because this is 30 miles in from your hike if you were through hiking from Springer Mountain. And this structure was built by the Civilian Conservation Corps. And so it's been around for a while. It's been a restaurant. It's been multiple uses. Back in the 80s, a mountaineering store bought it. So now it's a great place to pick up supplies for mountain climbing and hiking. And so what happens is many of the more inexperienced hikers end up 30 miles into their through hike and realize they've got all the wrong gear. And these guys are positioned perfectly to take advantage of that. But they're also very helpful, very knowledgeable, and give a lot of good guidance as to what you need to dump out and what you don't need and what you should have and the kind of pack you need, the kind of shoes you need. So that's called mountain crossing. And the original name of this structure or this area was Wallace-Yee, which is a Cherokee name, actually for, I think it's called Frog Mountain, I think is the translation there. And this tree here is called the boot tree. And this is the hikers, when they came up, at least the myth is that they came up and realized their boots didn't fit, or they just couldn't hack it at all. And so they throw their boots up in the tree and believe them and leave the mountain or go into mountain crossing and get a boot that's going to fit. So I don't know how true that is, but for some reason, there are all these boots hanging from this tree. So coming out of Neal Gap, several miles of several different hikes up to higher mountains, and then you get up to 3,800 feet to Cow Rock Mountain, and you got, again, a nice flat rock, some beautiful sights. And then you get hit kind of a flatter spot that's a little easier terrain, really nice along kind of a ridge line there, and then you come on this low gap shelter. So this is a more typical shelter that you see on the trail, where it's usually three-sided and one is exposed, and then you just kind of put your mat down and everybody just sleeps all in a line here. And then you've got bare cables over here. There's a privy down this side, and there's a lot of tenting area around here. I've tented up on the hill just next to this shelter. It's a really nice, pretty place. A lot of owls there you hear at night. And then again, sort of walking across this flatter terrain, you come across Chattahoochee Gap, and now you're back up at 3,500 feet. And then you're going up to Blue Mountain, and then you come the other side, down Blue Mountain into Unicoi Gap. And this is another group, as you can see, on a totally different day. It was very rainy. And this is in Unicoi Gap. So on our hike, you would be coming out of this area to your right of these pictures. That's coming off of Blue Mountain and then down into this gap. And now there's, of course, a highway 57, that's built through this gap. And there's plenty of parking here. And then we would take off to our left here on the next leg of our trip, which we'll cover in 2 weeks from today. So now we've covered up to mile 52.5. And that's our hike for tonight.